What is happening, guys? My name is Jamie and today we're reviewing Pallbearer's new album Forgotten Days. Now this particular band is quite interesting to me. If you don't like doom metal, please click off right now because you won't enjoy this album. This is a full-on straight-on doom metal album being inspired by many bands such as Candlemass, Black Sabbath, and if you like all these sort of bands, you're pretty much going to like Forgotten Days. Now, in my opinion, Pallbearer hasn't released a bad album, and nor is Forgotten Days a bad album, but there are some weaknesses on this album. Some of this album didn't gravitate towards me, and I'll tell you why it didn't gravitate towards me. It's the overall production on this album that is a big letdown. The drums on this album sound organic, but just a lot of crashing and smashing with the cymbals, and you really can't hear the tone of the snare, and the overall drum mix is way too low in the mix, and the production on this album is very similar to bands like Baroness, Alda, and Pallbearer usually have really good production, but on this album the production just lacks, and it's a lackluster affair on the production side. Songwriting side, it's very interesting. Where Heartless was more proggy and a really nice build up towards the riffs, Forgotten Days is basically guitar driven. There's a lot of meaty riffs on this album. The songwriting is still very good with some really long songs as well, but it just feels like that some of these songs are quite predictable towards that doom listener. You want some unpredictable moments in doom at times, and this is ideally not the best doom metal album of the year by far. I've heard a lot of great doom metal albums this year. Forgotten Days is a very good album, but it's not up to the grandiose greatness of some doom metal albums this year. Sorrow and Extinction was a fantastic album, and this was my first Pallbearer album I heard, and I fucking well loved it. This to me is a little bit of a step back, where the production is quite underwhelming, but also sonically it is quite murky, and it creates this ethereal atmosphere within the album. The guitar tone on this album is actually pretty good, and I do love the overall lyrics. The lyrics are talking about isolation, talking about the pandemic and everything like that. It's pretty highly political based, this album, you could say. There's a lot of emotion conveyed on this album. Brett's vocals on this album are absolutely fantastic, dynamic at times, but yet does sound monotone, especially through songs Riverbed, Stasis, and Silver Wings. The instrumentals on this album are fantastic, they really are. At times they're quite slow and doomy, but Pallbearer are very good at building things up, and that's what you want from a Pallbearer album, the build up of things. The riffrages are really good, really nice chord progression throughout most of this album. So overall, my favourite song off the album is Silver Wings, that's for sure, because it's quite a long doomy song, and I fucking well loved it. I just love the build up and introduction that leads onto a really nice slow drawing guitar solo, and the drums are a little bit better on this. The overall mixing and balancing on this album is not equilibrium. Mixing is just all over the place on this album, and that is just one negative, and I don't know if they did this on purpose to make the listener feel quite uncomfortable, but I do enjoy it sonically at times. Get some killer guitar work, get some killer drums as well, but unfortunately can't really hear the intricacy of the drums because there's just a whole lot of fucking cymbals going on. And I suppose that's good at times. It gets quite repetitive. I think that the album structure is a little bit off. I feel like Silver Wings should have ended off the fucking album. To end off an epic like that would have been amazing, but surely Caledonia is an interesting way to end off the album. It's probably the most catchiest song off the album with a really nice guitar solo throughout the introduction. But yeah, this album kicks ass, especially in the first part. Forgotten Days is fantastic. I just love, this is probably the fastest song off the album. Riverbed is really interesting, much more energetic song, but yet slower in tone. And Stasis is another catchy song, but Silver Wings is the best song off the fucking album. Vengeance of Ruination has got a really awesome guitar solo throughout the middle, and the Rite of Passage is another pretty good song. I was a bit worried about the Rite of Passage. I thought they were going to cover a Dream Theater song, and then I said, oh no, hopefully they're not going to cover a Dream Theater song, but luckily they didn't, and Rite of Passage is another fucking banger. Like I said, Brett's vocals are good on this album, but to me, at times he does sound monotone. He has a really unique vocal style, and you can tell the guitars and vocals are very emotive on this album that creates this really atmospheric vibe. This album sounds huge, and the reason why it sounds huge is the drums. Although I'm not a big fan of the drums on this album, I feel that the drums and the cymbals just create a massive anthemic, create this huge arena-like effect towards the listener. Like sonically, this album sounds epic and majestic. And yeah, there are certain elements that are very interesting to me, because at times I criticize the production, but the production makes it epic. It really does. So I'm really torn whether I like the production or not. This is a really good introducing album for those that want to get into Doom, because there are some really nice gritty guitar riffs. This album is slow. It's a very slow album, but what do you expect from fucking Doom? Doom is fucking slow, so get your head out of your ass and widen up your sphincter and enter into the Doom spectrum. The Doom element on this album is absolutely fantastic. Now, this band really reminds you of Black Sabbath, God Rhythm, Chemist, and even Outer. Although Outer's more progressive, it's still got the same sort of style sonically. Pallbearer, Forgotten Days, is a pretty solid album, it really is, but there is just one negative, is of course the production. Sonically the drums aren't great, and all you can hear is just cymbals and a little bit of the snare, but really that's about it. Guitar tone sounds okay, at times sounds very chainsaw-y, you could say, but yet lavishing at times and flourishing moments on this album. But yeah, probably a 7.5 out of 10 I will give Pallbearer, Forgotten Days. A lot of people are saying that Pallbearer is the answer for Doom. Yeah, okay, sure it is. Maybe the answer for introductory Doom, but in my opinion, there are so many better albums than this album. A lot of people will be thankful that it's just clean vocals on this album. So Pallbearer just utilizes clean vocals throughout most of the albums, so don't expect any harsh vocals on this album. But yeah, it's a pretty solid album by Pallbearer. It gets 7.5 out of 10. So guys, that's where I leave you for this album review. Comment below if you enjoyed this album review. Do you agree or disagree with my opinion? Keep the discussion going in the comment section below, and I will